Welcome to Lean Body Mind. My name is Steve and I will be your host and companion on this channel as we look for little ways to improve our productivity and just make our lives a little bit better. I'd originally planned on filming this video outside. I planned on filming last week's video outside as well, but today it's sort of a cross between looking like it's going to rain and also my neighbor is mowing his lawn with a tractor mower. And I have no idea why having a quarter acre requires a tractor mower other than to make a lot of noise. But that's what he's doing. He's making a lot of noise. So I am in here recording this, which would be the second prequel podcast. Now, the reason I'm recording these prequel podcasts is twofold. One is I believe that the more you know about me and my history, the more context it will give to some of the topics that I cover in the future once this channel gets fully up and rolling. The second reason is, in order for this channel to get fully up and rolling, I need 4,000 hours of total view time, which means I need to make a couple of longer form videos like this. In last week's video, I covered a pretty good chunk of my history of cooking, how I was drawn to cooking, how I developed as a cook, and so forth. I also mentioned that there would be some overlap between the cooking video and this video, which is about my history with continuous improvement, because I feel like the two are just sort of married to one another. It's very easy to have a passion for one when you have a passion for the other. Now, I'm going to call it continuous improvement. In different businesses I've worked for, they've called it different things. Sometimes it's process excellence, other times it's operational excellence. I'm sure there's some other titles as well. But I kind of felt like the excellence ones were a little bit, grandiose, a little lofty. To me, it's about improvement. It's not about being excellent. It's about always getting better. And that's why I've always liked the name continuous improvement for what we're going to talk about. As I was sort of rehearsing this video and the story that I would tell in my mind, I thought about the interview question that you can get sometimes, which is, walk me through your resume or take me through your work history. And the best way to answer that, in my experience, whether I'm the interviewer or the interviewee, is to be brief, to maybe share some of the commonalities that you saw between roles, and then pitch it back to the interviewer to let them sort of drive what you talk about. So walk me through your resume. As you can see on my resume, I do have a pretty diverse work background, but there are a couple of things that I think really have been commonalities between each role. The first of which is, I think every role I've ever been in, I've had a very sudden thrusting into more responsibility. I mean, very early in each role. So that's been pretty common, having to step up and take on more than I expected when I took on the role itself. But the other thing is the whole continuous improvement thread that has run through every job I've had. My goal with every job has been to leave the role as a better role than the one that I inherited. Now, are there specific points in my career, specific jobs you'd like to talk more about? So it winds up being a very quick summary that then allows the interviewer to direct the conversation and for you to be able to respond to more specific questions or concerns. That is not going to be my approach in this video, however. I'm going to do my best to make it not seem like a rambling job interview question. We'll see. It may be necessary for me to edit this video a little bit more aggressively than the one from last week, which I felt was more conversational. As I look back on my history with continuous improvement, it really started with cooking. And I mentioned this last week. I started with eggs. Eggs was my first thing. And I started playing around with temperature and then things like, what if I cook it in butter? If I fry an egg in butter versus I fry an egg just using Pam cooking spray. I mean, this was not rocket science. This was not design of experiment. This was just a 6 or 7 year old trying out different things. The other thing that I really, really loved to make was pudding. Just the Jell-O instant brand chocolate pudding. And I started experimenting with that too, experimenting with the quantity of milk or using Cool Whip in the pudding itself, or a combination of those two. One of the things I found though that I didn't like with pudding is once you refrigerated it for a day or two, provided it lasted that long without eating it, but you would get this little skin on the surface of the pudding. And that kind of grossed me out. It was kind of, a little leathery or rubbery. Or if it waited even longer, that skin would start to crack and you've had these crevices or crevasses, I don't know which way to pronounce it, but you would have these cracks in the pudding. And that kind of grossed me out. I don't know why, but it just did. So I started experimenting. I would cover the pudding bowl, with plastic wrap, cling wrap, saran wrap. This was back in the 70s, so this was back when plastic wrap actually stuck to stuff like bowls. It probably had some horrible, horrible chemical in it that allowed it to do that. But now it seems like most plastic wraps, about the only thing they stick to is itself. But I digress. I found that putting the plastic wrap over the pudding did slow down the whole skin and crack process. But at some point it occurred to me, what if I pressed the plastic all the way down right onto the surface of the pudding? Then, no exposure to air, no skin, no cracks. The pudding was just like I had made it a minute ago. Now I know I'm not the first person to think of this, but this was in the mid-70s. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have TikTok with various kitchen hacks and things like that. I figured it out on my own and thought, wow, that was pretty smart of me. As I got a little bit older and inherited the job of mowing the lawn, I started looking at ways that I could mow the lawn more rapidly, because the sooner you're done with a chore, the sooner you can get back to playing video games on your Atari, which is what I would far prefer to do rather than mow the lawn. And I started playing around with different lawn mowing patterns and found that what slows you down the most when you're mowing the lawn is the turns, especially if you're doing a 180-degree turn. So if I were doing columns or rows or diagonals, every time you... There's the cat. He may pay a visit again on this video. Every time you would hit the end of a row or column and do that 180-degree turn, that was time you were... Kitty, stop it. That was times when you weren't mowing because you were turning, and it just added to the overall length of time it took to mow the lawn. So I figured out the fastest way to mow is to minimize turns, and the way to minimize turns is to go in circles around your lawn. Either you start at the house and you work your way out, or you start at the perimeter and work your way in. Again, I was thinking I was pretty smart for figuring this out. Once I got to my high school years, I think the main standout in terms of continuous improvement for me was when I was working at Happy Joe's Pizza Parlor. And normally as a teenager, you would just work evenings, but periodically you'd get tapped to come in on a Saturday morning and help with restaurant prep, which meant getting all the ingredients prepped up. So things like having 30 pounds of ground beef, and we'd mix this seasoning in by hand and get it all into crumbles, and you'd put it in these great big Cambro containers, or these massive bags of mozzarella. Or I remember being put in charge of dicing up green peppers. And it was just dozens. You had dozens and dozens and dozens of green peppers. And I was back in the back kitchen, back by where the dishwasher was, just that way, I could throw away the various scraps. But I recall after slicing and dicing the first one, I looked up on a shelf and I saw a potato or a French fry cutter. So the thing that you put a French fry in, and there was a handle you'd push down, and it would push the potato through this grate, and you would get fries. And I got the idea, what if I took a green pepper, I'd cut it in half from top to bottom, pop out the stem and seeds, and then set one of those in the French fry maker, push down the lever, voila. I had perfectly diced green peppers. Every one looked identical. It was the perfect size and shape. So I started playing around with how many green pepper halves could I put in a row before, when I'm pushing down on the handle, one of them would squirt out the side. And I found that 4 seemed to be about the magic number. But even at 4, I was banging out these diced green peppers at just wicked speed. And later, the manager and co-owner, Ellie, came back, and I shared with her what I did. And she seemed kind of unimpressed. I was very impressed with myself, but she, not so much. And it occurred to me at the time that perhaps this had been the method she expected me to do all along, but just wanted to see if I could figure it out on my own. And I did. When I went to college, my interest in continuous improvement kind of waned. I was a lot more interested in going out to the bars and playing pool and things like that. And that could be one of the reasons why my grades were not that hot, especially initially. I was a pre-med major in biomedical engineering, and that lasted all of one semester. And then I took an aptitude test, and it told me that I should be in business. So I switched my major and went into marketing. And when I realized that I wasn't going to graduate in 4 years, I decided I would take on an additional major, and that was organizational management. A big portion of that class was studying Japanese manufacturing methodologies that seemed very, very odd at the time. So this was back in the mid-'80s, and a lot of these, like Lean, Six Sigma, these were not terms I think many people were aware of back then. But we were doing things in this class like single piece flow, pull systems, Kanban, visual management, a lot of stuff that was lean, but I don't believe we ever called it lean. I don't know if we even called it the Toyota production system. But we were learning this stuff that at the time seemed very cutting edge, and in fact, perhaps too much, because nobody was looking for continuous improvement people right out of college back in 1990, 1991. As a result, I took a number of different low-paying jobs over the next few years, working in retail sales at a computer store, and then doing some very, very high-interest consumer finance loans. Then I wound up at GE Medical Systems working on their help desk, their IT help desk. This was back in the days when you didn't get a call tree. You would dial a number and someone would answer, and they couldn't remotely control your PC. They just had to be a good communicator and a good listener and be able to ask the right questions in order to help you solve your problem with Windows 3.1 or whatever you were on. And that was me. I did that for a couple of years before going to work for the largest health insurance provider in the state of Wisconsin. I got my CNE, my Certified Network Engineer for Novell 3.x. So this is dating me if I haven't already, those of you who are in IT. And I essentially managed a 28-server network statewide. Now, shortly before starting, they had had massive problems with downtime. And my boss had instituted a plan of proactive maintenance that he would do, or he would have me do, and some of my coworkers do, every Wednesday night from 8 p.m. till midnight. So every server, we would take the server down, we'd run it through a bunch of maintenance, we'd reboot it, we'd defrag the hard drives, etc. And it was a tedious process, but it created an uptime that was close to 100%. And really, although I didn't realize it at the time, that was a form of lean. It was TPM, or total productive maintenance. Now, the big problem with this total productive maintenance was I already had to be in at work at 5 in the morning. I had to be in at 5 in the morning because a couple of our major servers, if they crashed, it took about 2 hours to bring them back up, and all the servers needed to be up by 7 in the morning. So I was in every day before 5. That meant I had to be up probably around 4 in the morning every day because it was a half-hour drive to work, and I had to get showered and brush my teeth and all that stuff. So I was up at 4, and if it was a Wednesday, I was at work until midnight. I mean, maybe sometimes I would go home during the afternoon, try and take a quick nap, and then come back. But again, half-hour drive into work, 4 hours doing maintenance, half-hour drive home. Now I'm home, it's 12:30 in the morning, and I've got to be up in another 3.5 hours to go to work. So it was really something I wanted to figure out a way to do more efficiently. Now, as I said, we had 28 servers statewide, which meant when we'd drive downtown and we would perform this maintenance, we would remotely log in to all these different servers. We had servers downtown, we had servers in the old Pabst Brewery building, which became an office park. We had servers out in the suburbs, about 5-10 minutes away from where I lived, and then all throughout the state of Wisconsin. Now, my thought was, if we're remotely logging in, why do I need to come in downtown? Why don't I just go to our suburb 5-10 minutes away from my house, and I could just commandeer a dozen cubicles and their PCs and log in from there? Further, I started timing how long certain events took in terms of maintenance and maintenance on specific servers, and found that by changing the sequencing of certain steps, I was able to reduce this process from 4 hours down to an hour and a half, sometimes even close to an hour if everything went smoothly. So now I was home by 9:30, between 9:30, 10 o'clock, got a couple extra hours of sleep. It was great. And it was great not just for me, it was great for my coworkers. And it was great for whoever got the job after I moved on to a different job. So that's kind of what I talked about leaving a role in a better state than what you inherited. I then returned to GE, this time GE Capital, and was in charge of their desktop support and network management for that business. And not long after I'd come back to GE, we started hearing about Six Sigma. This was Jack Welch's new pet thing. He had found out about it through a visit to Motorola and decided that GE was going to become a Six Sigma company. So all of us started getting trained. And even though I was GE Capital, we were very, very closely tied to GE Medical. So I wound up getting the same Six Sigma training that GE Medical folks did, and eventually achieved my Green Belt certification. So I'll talk more about this when I do a segment on Six Sigma, the various belts. So Green Belts are sort of the rank and file employee that are going to be doing projects, but don't necessarily have to know how to do all the statistical analytics and things like that, because they'll be coached or mentored by a black belt. Black belts often will teach green belt classes, and then there are master black belts, which is what I wound up becoming, where you teach the black belts and the green belts and pretty much anybody else. But at the time I got green belt certified, this was still a new enough deal and a big enough deal that I actually got my plaque, and it was signed. It wasn't a pre-printed or stamped thing. It was signed by Jeff Immelt, and he presented it to me directly and got my picture taken with him. And that seemed pretty cool, because Jeff Immelt then went on to become the CEO of GE in total. But that didn't turn out real well, as we'll talk about later. I found very rapidly that I geeked out hard on this Six Sigma stuff. It was the process excellence stuff that I enjoyed, but I also enjoyed the statistical stuff, digging into a data set and solving a mystery. And the mystery in Six Sigma is, why are we making defects? Why are we making bads? So an example of this would be a light bulb that doesn't work, or an invoice that's inaccurate, or an incoming check that's misapplied, or failure to hit a customer's requested delivery date. You can define almost anything in a process as good or bad, and in Six Sigma, you want to limit the number of bads. So I just, like I said, I geeked out on this. I wanted to become a black belt because I saw that as a great career path, and I rapidly found myself, as a black belt, asking questions of the instructors and the master black belts that they couldn't answer. I was diving into places in Minitab, which was the statistical analytical software that we used. I was diving into places in that people hadn't gone before, at least in my business. So I had to become very much self-taught. And then in that theme of suddenly being thrust into a bigger role than I expected, GE shut down their centralized training for Six Sigma. I believe it was called CLOE, Center for Learning and Operational Excellence, I think. Everything at GE is an acronym. But they shut that down and said that businesses now needed to identify their own trainers, and that was me. So I rapidly found myself teaching green belt training, teaching black belt training, and when you're teaching classes that are a week long, it's just you. 1 week, 40 hours of training. You learn that you need to start being fun. You need to be entertaining. And that was really the beginning of my style, I guess, when it comes to training. And you see some of that, I think, in my videos on Serious Keto. Some maybe are a little bit dry, but I try and have fun. I try and make it fun. I try and keep it entertaining. So I started to develop a reputation as the go-to guy for training, and a number of other GE businesses would request that I would come and teach Six Sigma there. So I was really becoming the Six Sigma guy. And then Lean came along. Well, I mean, Lean had been around, but it came to GE. And once again, I sort of got thrust into that. And at the time, like I said, I was working at GE Capital. So we're taking this methodology that was really designed for manufacturing, and I was told I needed to make this applicable in an office environment. So I did this through taking pretty much every Lean tool that was applicable and finding real-world examples both inside and outside of the office that people would be familiar with, so that it didn't seem like an unusual or foreign or it wouldn't feel odd. You wouldn't have organ rejection of Lean. And I wound up creating the first transactional Lean showcase site in GE. So I wound up being recognized by the president and CEO at the time, Jeff Immelt, of GE for doing this. There were another, I think, 8 or 9 sites, but they were all manufacturing. And I think it's generally easier to apply Lean in a manufacturing setting because it was born out of a manufacturing setting. But then 2007 hit, and it didn't matter that I was the training guy. It didn't matter that I was the Lean guy. The economy was starting to tank, and since I was in the capital business, they felt that first. And I got laid off, and I went to work for Cooper Power Systems, where I kind of repeated what I had done at GE and created the first transactional Lean showcase site in the customer service center at Cooper Power Systems. So of all of Cooper Industries, this was the first transactional show site, which meant leaders from other businesses were coming to see how I did what I did. One of the problems, though, I experienced when I was working at Cooper was a problem that I think happens a lot with Lean, which is it gets misused by leadership. And I started feeling this the very first time I presented to the president of Cooper Power Systems and his staff. I had done a project, I don't remember specifically what it was, but I know it was in the customer service center, and it was going to eliminate about 2,000 hours of non-value added activity. And the president said, "Okay, great. Who's getting laid off?" I said, "Pardon me?" And he said, "You're eliminating 2,000 hours. Give me a head count. What's the name of the person that I get to lay off?" And I said, "But that's not how Lean works. We're trying to create more capacity. We're trying to create more opportunity for people to do things that are valuable. If we're just eliminating the person along with the non-value added work, we haven't improved. We're still at the same place." And he told me that's a bunch of BS, that if you can't measure it in people or pounds, it's not real. And I started almost immediately thinking I had made a mistake coming to work there. But I've continued to see that in other businesses. When I wound up going back to GE, again, third time, I saw it there. And it was bad enough that employees started getting afraid of Lean. When the Lean guy or gal would show up, people were like, "Yeah, no. The last time you brought Lean in here, we wound up losing 3 of our coworkers." So GE started changing the name. It started getting names like Simplification. And even then, I remember I was doing a project with the service department, and the general manager pulled me aside and said, "I just want us to be clear on this. This is a simplification process." And I said, "I'm not sure I am clear. What do you mean? What are you looking for in terms of an outcome?" And he said, "Headcount reduction." So it's unfortunate that these tools are often misused here in this country. It taints the brand, really, and it hurts a little part deep down inside of me. And as a result, I changed my interviewing strategy when I would interview for companies after my third parting with GE, and I would ask companies, "Why do you do Lean?" Or "Why do you want to do Lean?" And if the answer is headcount reduction, then I tell them, "I'm sorry, that's just, I can't support that. I can't teach here as a consultant. I can't work here as an employee." So all of this has been a rather long explanation about how my belief in what continuous improvement is and should be came to be. Continuous improvement, first, it's sort of self-defined. You're always trying to get better. That doesn't mean you're disappointed with where you are. You can celebrate every improvement, every milestone. But know that that then becomes your new baseline, and you're still trying to get better. The next philosophy that I have in terms of continuous improvement is it should be accessible and usable. If you spend a week in a class and you come out of that class and can't use anything that you were taught, that was a waste of everybody's time. I want people, when they leave my class, to be excited, to be ready to try and use this stuff and to make their jobs better, easier, more productive. And that leads to the third element of my philosophy on continuous improvement, which is it's not about the business, it's about the employee. Ideas should be bubbled up from employees. They are the person closest to the task. They are the person closest to the customer. And when they make their job better, that's empowering. And it feels good. And that good feeling gets passed on to the customer. And I feel that even on a personal level, as we go through this journey together, we're going to feel good as we make these little changes and improvements in our lives. And I think the people around us, our friends, our family, our coworkers, they will benefit from that new, improved us, the more efficient us, the happier us. So unless I come up with another Steve history sort of topic, I think that might be it for the prequels. And next week, we'll start diving into what is Lean and what is Six Sigma, and how are those going to play out in the future of Lean Body Mind. As always, I thank you for watching.